And I mentioned that Labour today is focusing on law and order issues. It's promising to safeguard neighbourhood policing in England and Wales and ensure that forces won't have to cut officer numbers. Let's get more on the detail of the proposals. Yvette Cooper, Labour's Home Affairs spokesperson, is there for us at Westminster. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you planning to pay for this?
Well, we know that the Tories are planning very substantial cuts in the next Parliament, a really extreme approach, which we think is the wrong approach. We need to bring the deficit down, but in a balanced way, year on year. And we know that they're particularly threatening policing over the next few years. Chief constables are warning that we could lose neighbourhood policing altogether. I think that would be devastating because it's that partnership between police and communities that's so important. So that's why we're setting out an alternative plan, and we've identified £800 million of savings over the first 3 years that we can put back into the front line to protect neighbourhood policing and protect 10,000 police officers from cuts over the first 3 years by making sure that chief constables have the resources to do that.
And that's going to include the axing of elected police and crime commissioners. How much is that going to save you?
That's right. We would save £50 million next year from not going ahead with the elections from police and crime commissioners. But over the Parliament, we think it's about £130 million because you also save from the running costs of police and crime commissioners. We think we can put a cheaper system in place. Because, look, in the end, very few people voted for the police and crime commissioners. I think it's just a flawed system, and we'd be far better putting that money back into frontline policing, back into keeping police on the beat instead.
Just to be clear, though, on where the money comes from and where it goes, because the Conservatives have this morning put out a quote from Chris Leslie, your Treasury spokesperson, dating back only to Labour, when he talked about the axing of elected police and crime commissioners going towards paying off the deficit. So which is it?
Well, he was asked for areas where we were identifying savings. This is one of the areas where we're identifying savings. What we're saying is by identifying these savings, we can recognise that, look, there will have to be savings made in the Home Office budget because it is, one of those areas we'll have to do that in order to bring the deficit down. But we can do that at the same time as protecting neighbourhood policing and preventing 10,000 police officers, actually will be over 10,000 police officers going under the Tories' plans. And there's other areas as well. For example, we would stop the subsidy for gun licences. I don't think it's right that police should subsidise the gun licence system. We would also require police forces to work together, something that the Tories have repeatedly refused to do. They want police and crime commissioners to all make their own decisions about their different contracts for equipment, and yet there's strong evidence from the National Audit Office, from other organisations, that if they pulled together and did joint contracts, they could save hundreds of millions of pounds on equipment. Again, these are savings that we would make that the Tories could not make.
You're critical of some aspects of current government policy, as you've just outlined, but you would surely have to acknowledge that in the last 5 years, the crime figures have fallen significantly, and that matters to voters.
Well, it's very important that things like car crime, for example, have continued their 20-year decline.
But crime figures have fallen, you would acknowledge that?
Crime has changed, so there are different
kinds
of...
So it's not fallen?
Things have happened to different kinds of crime. So car crime has fallen, theft has fallen. However, you also have violent crime has been increasing. And you've got growing reports of things like child sexual abuse and domestic violence and rapes being reported to the police, which is right, they should have to deal with. But also a big escalation in online crime. We've also got a growing terrorism threat and growing extremism. So, in fact, the demands on the police are increasing because they're having to deal with these much more complex crimes, particularly around child sexual exploitation, and there's evidence that there's been a 60% increase in reports of child sexual exploitation and yet a 9% drop in arrests.
Okay.
And I think that is really troubling. You've got a drop in arrests and prosecutions in those areas where crime is going up, and that means that what you're seeing is lack of justice for victims, lack of protection for victims, and more criminals getting off. That is the consequence of the approach that the Tories have taken to policing. We're not going to do that. That's why we've got an alternative plan to protect so many police officers.
Yvette Cooper, we must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for coming on. Let's take a look at some other of today's campaign stories. The Liberal Democrats are promising a new scheme to help young working people